Hi, my name is Lori Mesa. I'm a crime prevention specialist here at the Kern County Sheriff's Office, and with me is Sergeant David Hubbard with Detectives. So today we're going to be talking about domestic violence. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we just want to bring some information that might shed light to anyone who has any questions or might not know about domestic violence. So one of the first questions that I wanted to ask you is, how often do you, or have you in your career, had to answer to domestic violence calls?
So I've had an opportunity to work in a lot of different capacities within the Sheriff's Office, and I've seen domestic violence calls in every place that I've worked. Unfortunately, it's a pretty high volume of calls for the Sheriff's Office, and generally any law enforcement agency for that matter. Patrol is constantly handling domestic violence calls, multiple a day.
Multiple a day. Do you see a difference necessarily when it comes to men and women, or do you see both men and women getting abused?
There are definitely circumstances where both men and women are being abused. I believe that statistically it is more likely for a woman to be a victim of domestic violence, but that certainly does not prevent a man from being a victim of domestic violence just as easily as a woman.
Okay. And when you answered domestic violence calls, or when you have answered domestic violence calls, did you see a lot of recurring victims, people who were constantly in a dangerous home life situation?
Unfortunately, that's true. There are a lot of abusive relationships that continue to carry on even past law enforcement reporting of domestic violence incidents. Whether it is a change of heart or a promise that it won't happen again, or just that desire to have somewhat of stability, whether that's financial stability or somewhere to stay, and having desire to go back into that position or run the risk and hope it doesn't happen again. It is pretty prevalent that there are recurring victims.
Right. What would you say is a successful domestic violence call?
Anytime we have the ability to stop a traumatic event from occurring, a domestic violence event from occurring, preferably before it happens, whenever things are escalating. But unfortunately, a lot of times we don't get the call until after something's already taken place. So if we're successful in being able to determine what took place from both parties or all parties that are involved, and ensure that we're following the facts and not unsubstantiated or unsupported statements, and we're able to have a successful outcome, whether that means separating the parties for the day or in like an argument type situation that hasn't become physical, or something that has elevated to the point that it has become a criminal violation. If we have the ability to locate the offender and take them into custody, and ensure that our victims are provided the resources they need, and at least temporarily, as long-term as we can manage at least, for them to be removed from that abusive relationship, and have some comfort in knowing that they're safe. That's successful for us.
And if you were to refer someone somewhere, what would be a great resource to refer someone who is trying to get away from a dangerous home life situation?
So luckily here in Kern County we have a ton of resources for domestic violence victims. We do have kind of a one-stop shop. That's the Family Justice Center on Oak Street. That facility has everything you could potentially need, whether that's some financial assistance, some assistance in filling out paperwork, restraining orders. Really, they can point you in the right direction if they need to. If they have the services on hand, they'll definitely help you out there. And that facility is staffed throughout the day.
And as a professional who's seen a lot of domestic violence victims, what would you say are some good warning signs to let the community know if they're seeing something going on, a way that someone might cry for help, a warning sign to look out for?
Every situation is different. It's hard to really pinpoint individual warning signs. People react differently whenever they're in any type of relationship with a person, whether it be a dating type relationship or a friendship. So it's kind of hard to say that there are particular indicators. One thing that is important to know is that typically speaking, domestic violence incidents tend to escalate in violence. So if there are relatively low levels, or at least perceived low levels of violence, that has a high likelihood of increasing to something that is far more dangerous. So if somebody is in a situation where they are finding themselves being a victim of domestic violence, regardless of the severity, it's best that they seek some assistance, some guidance, and at least consider removing themselves permanently from that abusive relationship.
And also, as a bystander, let's say we do know for a fact that we have a friend or family member who is being abused. Do you see that someone is going to walk away from an abusive relationship on that first call for service, or would you advise, maybe a little bit of patience and demonstrate how many times it takes sometimes for someone to walk away from that situation?
Yeah, it's definitely something that appears hard. Just speaking from interactions that I've had with domestic violence victims, is that it's hard to get away on the first go around, or at all for that matter. There's a lot of consideration that's taken in. Like I kind of mentioned, some of it's financial, some of it's where am I going to sleep tonight, some of it is where are my kids going to stay, are we going to have a custody battle, am I going to not see my kids, whatever it may be. There are definitely a lot of challenges with removing yourself from an abusive relationship. But luckily there are resources out there to help you, and there are a lot of people that are willing to jump in and help you. One thing that I will also mention is that a call for service for domestic violence, that is the initial reporting of what took place. It is the deputy's responsibility to arrive at that location and gather all of the facts, evidence, information, and make a determination as to whether or not a law has been violated. There's a big difference between a perceived threat and a law violation, and we're certainly there to gather all the facts and make the best, well-informed decision that we can as to whether or not a law has actually been broken before we start taking enforcement action.
That's great information. And before we wrap it up, is there anything else you want to say from our law enforcement perspective to anybody who might have any questions or just be concerned about domestic violence?
I can assure you that the Sheriff's Office takes domestic violence very seriously. We have seen everything from obviously the most minor of arguments all the way up through and including domestic violence that results in tragedy, in death. We don't want to see that. We don't want anybody to be a part of that. We don't want anybody to feel like they're helpless or hopeless and can't get out of that abusive relationship. There's resources there, and those resources can certainly start with the deputies here at our office. Our deputies want to come out, they want to help, they want to be there for you in a time of need. Another thing to keep in mind is that while the deputies are certainly there to help, we may not be able to resolve all of the problems in the time that it takes to handle a call for service. The long-term resources are certainly available, and we want to be there to try to help point everyone in the right direction. But obviously we're limited in what we're able to handle in the short period of time that we have interaction with victims. So it's very important that even if somebody suspects that either party in a domestic violence relationship needs assistance, they reach out and get the resources they need for them. And I think that we were talking earlier about maybe some younger victims of domestic violence and this starting young. I think probably you've had some conversation with younger folks about
definitely. So anger, aggression, and what you tolerate in a relationship, it starts early. Most victims of domestic violence have experienced their first violent or abusive relationship between the ages of 11 and 17. So if you find yourself in a relationship where you feel like you're being controlled at a very young age, you need to pay attention to why are you tolerating that, and understand that that is not a healthy relationship, and you're setting yourself up for that cycle of abuse and that aggression as well. If you notice that you have aggressive behavior between the ages of 11 and 17, get the help, ask for help, say I don't want to feel like this, I don't want to be like this, and make sure that you're doing what you can as a young person to stop that cycle of abuse and end that tragedy from happening to you the same way it may have happened to your parents or aunts or uncles or other people in your life.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good point. We have certainly handled numerous calls for service of adolescents who are facing abusive relationships at a younger age, and sometimes teenagers can be hard to communicate with and encourage to seek out help.
Right.
They really don't want the help. But it is very important for everyone to understand that help's out there regardless of age, regardless of the position you're in. And reaching out and seeking that help is the first step in anything.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your professional expertise on this topic.
Absolutely.
And Crime Prevention Unit can be reached at 661-391-7559 if you have any other questions about resources in regards to domestic violence.